Sniper Elite V2 is a great example of a gaming glow-up. In high school, it was a little quiet, soft-spoken, didn't look the best, and just didn't know when to rein things in. It had potential, but required refinement. But in college, little Sniper Elite grew up in a Sniper Elite V2. It learned more about itself and was able to work closer to its strengths while smoothing out its weaknesses. It could still be loud and bombastic, but knew when to bring down the intensity. It's a Sniper Elite you could see yourself spending the rest of your life with. One frigid night in the Alps, as you gazed out at the snow-capped peaks of Grossglockner, you felt the words slip out before even realizing what you were saying. Grossglockner is the highest mountain in Austria, the highest mountain in the Alps east of the Brenner Pass. Also, I love you, Sniper Elite. The world didn't change, but you learned to appreciate it even more. Because everyone loves killing Nazis.
Dude, just like you pull in and you just get spit right out of them.
I wasn't very dialed into the community when Sniper Elite was brought back for a second outing, but considering it's the title my brain automatically jumps to when I hear the word Sniper Elite, I can't be the only one that considers this the de facto start of the modern series. Rebellion went through a lot of changes in the late 2000s and early 2010s. They saw some rocky releases with Alien vs. Predator and Rogue Warrior, a K-hole in video game form that I absolutely need to check out at some point. These resulted in the closure of their Derby studio and cuts to their main Oxford location, with Rebellion CEO Jason Kingsley telling GamesIndustry.biz, "Sadly, we didn't find any solution other than closure for the Derby studio. At the same time as we were considering the options for the Derby studio, we were also looking at our staff needs in Oxford, given shifting business models and opportunities." Speaking on who exactly was cut, Kingsley said, "We've had good results over the last year working with outsourcing partners, and this has resulted in a small handful of junior roles at the Oxford office no longer being needed. With the tonal shift of the company towards smaller game titles and leveraging the ability to self-publish on digital storefronts, Sniper Elite V2 represented the culmination of the painful growth required for the studio to stay afloat." Sniper Elite released 2 and continues to receive mixed reviews, as it's remastered and re-released a la the Skyrim model. We're seeing in the industry a lot of discourse over the fact that companies seem to be more interested in grinding existing IPs into the dirt, with most original IPs seen in headlines alongside words like surprise hit, indie darling, or my favorite, worse than cancer, AIDS, and the Big Bang Theory, if the internet has anything to say about it. I mean, if you even hear about them at all. But if you take a right at development hell and a left a cult classic, in that intellectual property no man's land, you'll find nestled a bomb that will explode or, well, bomb, which is bringing older franchises back to life. It's not a terrible idea to pitch to investors since you already own the IP and can show some metrics for its success. It won't freak out your development team as much as putting out a call for ideas, which can signal to your staff that things are not going so hot, and you might already have a baked-in audience with low to no expectations. Actually, come to think of it, these are the best conditions, otherwise you get a Half-Life 3. To address a fact that some people might not like, I am using the remastered version here. My argument is pretty much that this is just a remaster and not a remake, which means the underlying engine has not been changed. It just has a new coat of paint, potentially runs better on newer hardware, and includes all the DLC content. It's like a Game of the Year edition with better graphics. This is now the expected standard for people who jump into the series, so I might as well start here. Also, for older titles, I don't critique graphics in a traditional sense. I care more about visual style and storytelling and the nuances that come with them than the actual nitty-gritty post-processing details. I know a game from 10 plus years ago is not going to look as good as a modern game, which is why my analysis usually turns to that of level design and other game mechanics. But while we're on the topic, I figure we should discuss the actual differences between the two, so you can decide if I'm a tasteless swine or
a pretty cool guy who isn't afraid of anything.
The OG version of V2 isn't available anymore, as Rebellion ditched it once the remastered version was released, which might be enough of a reason in and of itself for you to try and find a used copy of V2, as when the remaster came out, it got review bombed for being a cash grab. Personally, for what you're getting, I do think $40 Canadian is a little bit high, and I would wait for a sale personally, but if you own the original copy, you can upgrade it for $11.49. I don't know how much that is in freedom dollars, but I don't imagine it's too much. As previously mentioned, the main differences are the inclusion of DLC missions, which will cover weapons and characters. By the way, I was so confused looking this up after the fact because I'm an idiot who never checked the map beforehand and completely missed this loadout screen. Anyway, I think the DLC missions alone make the remastered version worth it. It's essentially 4 more missions that feel very different from the campaign offerings, but in all the ways I craved. It's like wanting to eat something sweet after you eat something salty. If something sweet were doming Hitler in the Alps. Again, I don't really feel the need to comment too much on the quality of graphics since this is a remaster, but before I get into the critiques I have another hot tip. If you're someone who gets motion sick when playing Sniper Elite, turn off acceleration and motion blur. You want whatever your default aiming device is to be as close to 1-to-1 with what you're seeing on screen. Unfortunately, as graphics get prettier and smoother, I hear from more and more people that suffer from motion sickness because of this. At the end of the day, it's because your eyes are seeing motion that's so lifelike, your brain is anticipating physical motion. If you aren't actually moving around, you end up feeling nauseous. Like I said, if Sniper Elite or any game for that matter does this to you, turn off mass acceleration and motion blur, crank up the FOV, and try moving your screen a little further away. My complaints about the graphics are few and far between. Overall, the fresh coat of paint is nice. People still sometimes look like they just forgot to turn the stove off. I don't know what everyone is on, but whatever it is, I think it just kicked in. 4K textures and HDR support is also fantastic. I really appreciated the ultra-wide support too. There's also a photo mode, which I don't use or understand, but I love its inclusion just for the folks out there who like that sort of thing. Y'all are mad lads, but I support you. One annoyance I did have with these textures comes with the territory of a remaster, which is where the newer textures just aren't exactly the same size as the object padding is in the actual game space. Like here, where I'm trying to shoot this rocket that's propped up against a container. I can see straight through it, but there's obviously a mesh or something in the way because every time I fire, I can see the ricochet marks. Also, because of this, it can be a little tough to judge sightlines when you're in cover. Oftentimes a guard will come just way too close and see me when I'm not entirely sure I was poking out far enough for him to have spotted me. Maybe it's because some pieces of cover glow blue when I get close. The work done with the audio is some of the best and most immersive in the series so far. Tom Clark Hill knocks it out of the park as Carl Fairburn. His voice somehow tells me everything I need to know about this man without Marvel making 3 movies based on his origin story.
Killing Wolf would have to wait. Nothing else mattered now. I had to stop that launch. It's an old trick, but a good one. Bingo. This had to be Wolf's escape plan.
The environmental sound design is also so crisp. Something I mentioned briefly in my Assassin's Creed video, by the way, go watch that one if you haven't yet, is the fact that I play games set in far-off places for the thrill of traveling and experiencing new locales on the cheap, which means immersion to me is paramount. Plus, good environmental sound design in my mind is subtle, high quality, and reactive to the player. My favorite moment of this in V2 was when entering any enclosed area that was mainly brick. The shouts of enemy soldiers, gunfire, footsteps, just everything blended together in a sort of violent harmony. Also, shout out to this train whistle for absolutely scaring the shit out of me. They also used the audio to tell some of the stories of the soldiers still stationed in Berlin. I really enjoyed sneaking around enemy-dense areas because we get to hear some of their banter and it really fleshes out and humanizes these soldiers.
Ist eine Frau aus Berlin rausgekommen? Ich weiß es nicht. Nicht wesentliche Kommunikationen sind verboten. Wenigstens keine schlechten Nachrichten, oder? Keine Nachricht, das ist alles. Ich will nicht daran denken.
Я чувствую, нас будут встречать в Сталинграде как герои.
Героев? Можно подумать, у нас был выбор.
А я вижу, война не убила твое чувство юмора.
This last clip in particular is just awesome for a history nerd like me.
Eine Zigarette. Mehr will ich gar nicht. In Ordnung. Dann gib mir deine Schokolade.
They're talking about trading cigarettes and chocolate, which gives us a fantastic glimpse into the underground economy that springs up in every conflict, which is ration trading. Everything from the prime MRE menu items to chocolate and candy, cigarettes, coffee, drugs, alcohol, anything and everything was up for grabs, even down to the clothes on your back. It's a great little detail that reminds us how important it was for these soldiers to try to emulate home and normality to keep their spirits up. If you're just coming into V2 fresh off of Sniper Elite 1, the first thing that you'll notice is overall movement feels less like completing a twisted biathlon at the World Figure Skating Championships. You no longer slide everywhere, moving when prone isn't almost faster than crouch walking. Running in V2 is something I rarely felt the need to do, both because you get into this awkward Gears of War style charge where the changing directions can be stiff, but also because the default walk speed honestly feels just right. If you're someone who can aim with any sort of accuracy using a controller, I definitely think the controls would be best on a gamepad. I just think the scope handles a lot better using a mouse to aim, but that's personal preference. One thing I really wish the controls would allow is for you to pick a dominant shoulder to square up with. There's a few times where I was hiding behind cover that didn't allow me to snap onto it using the cover system, where the enemies were running around the left corner, and I couldn't see until it was too late because of just how much space Carl takes up on the left part of the screen. I wanted to compare the differences in level design between Sniper Elite and V2, but as I started writing my list, I realized it wasn't going to be such a simple ordeal. I figure as I go through a list of my notable level design changes, I would do it against the backdrop of the DLC mission NEUDORF Outpost, which I noticed as I wrapped up my first playthrough is a recreation of Karl's Horst Reprise, one of my favorite levels from the first one. The most important thing to notice is that Rebellion has seen the light and opted for quality over quantity. V2 has less levels, sure, but in those levels there's less of an open world and more of an open but still linear world design. This is a change I think Sniper Elite needed at this point in its history. With a smaller surface area, for lack of a better word, more care and design can go into specific enemy encounters. This helps to make the game feel more cinematic from the ground up, whereas the first one really only tried to attempt this from a cutscene and storytelling perspective, and with a few of the encounters. Ultimately, I think that's a direction the game needed to go in for Rebellion to develop some of the systems that really benefit from this kind of level design, but unfortunately we're dropping from sorta open to open-ish, but if you put a gun in my head, I'd really say no. The nature of a more linear game means we're gonna lose out on our ability to choose different paths and routes to complete our mission, and I can tell Rebellion tried to paint over that detail. There are some areas where it looks like you have a few side paths at your disposal, when in reality there's one path and a bunch of really convincing doorways and alleyways, but when you pop out of this extremely linear route, it spits you out into a big arena that has more paths forward than you can count. Because I'd been taking such a direct route, I find it hard to take my mind out of taking the direct approach. Once I get into these levels where the versatility of Sniper Elite can really shine, I get some kind of decision fatigue almost, and forget to take advantage of doing things my way. Like in the Flak Tower level here, I got all the way up to the top of the hill, turned back, and saw like 3 other ways I could have handled the situation. For me, that means there's replayability, but I don't think everyone who plays is going to want to experience the full variability in level design enough to replay a level after beating it. I will say, whenever there's a large obstacle like a group of enemies or enemy armor, there's always a way to sneak around them, but
I don't need it. I don't need it. I definitely don't need it. I 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 need it!
Another thing that comes with the territory of a reboot/reimagining is the experimentation of the developers. In one of the later missions, we have to hold out against an enemy force attacking us almost in waves. I was waiting for this rocket to fuel up with no indication how close or how far from being done I was. I will say this particular holdout section is a great example of the devs allowing us to ditch the stealth and go loud. We have so many secondaries to choose from that it's very easy to go long stretches without ever using one. Having sections where we can let our hair down and crank out a soliloquy on our Chicago typewriter makes the quiet sections feel even better thanks to the contrast in gameplay. One of the most useful yet simple additions is the inclusion of soundbars indicating when you can take a shot that will be silenced by other loud noises. These are usually planes, explosions, etc. This mechanic apparently was in the first one, but there is no visual indication when it was okay to fire. In fact, when I looked it up, a good amount of people just claimed it was all guesswork. Regardless, one of the things I mentioned in my first video was that I gave up on trying to be stealthy fairly quickly once I realized how much of a chore it was going to be. But this visual indication of when you can take a silenced shot or not completely changes things for me. I'm much better at surveying a situation and coming up with a plan of attack. Of course, every new addition has to come with a price, and unfortunately the enemies in V2 have inherited the Vulcan senses of Sniper Elite 1's AI, but also their infectious stupidity, which can send inconsistent signals to the player. I mentioned earlier that I appreciated the go loud sections, that the game didn't just push us down the stealth path and give us a few instances where using our secondary was absolutely required. In fact, there's a button you can press that will instantly make you switch into this go loud mode. It's usually right here on the gas tank of trucks and tanks. This somehow makes every guard in the immediate area instantly and precisely aware of where you are, even if you blew it up with a silenced shot. This is extremely frustrating. I'd expect them to be on high alert and testy, but look at this. As soon as I take the shot, everyone somehow knows exactly where I am. These are the same enemies that will find a dead comrade and freak out for 5 to 30 seconds, then go right back to their patrol routes. When viewing through your scope, holding your breath gives you a little rangefinder that will not only steady your shot and slow down time, but adds a little diamond on screen that you can use to line up your shot. I'm sure there are purists that resent this inclusion, but I hear there's a physically disabled kid who wants an accessibility mode in Dark Souls, so they're probably still freaking the fuck out about that. Besides, it's not too hard to eyeball most shots once you get a feel for the map. It can be useful for when you've got some of those one chance shots that you can't afford to mess up. Something I noticed as well was how often I actually used my binoculars in this game compared to the first one. I think the ability to tag enemies is a great incentive for people to scope out the area beforehand. The kill chain of deciding what to do and from where is so much more succinct. Like, one of my big issues with the first Sniper Elite was feeling so unsure about my status, from being hidden to whether or not enemies saw me. Trying to be stealthy was like walking on eggshells. It made me take less chances. When it comes to fixing systems that aren't working, I'm always interested to see how a developer chooses to address a problem, and the inclusion of a ghosting system is an amazing way to so naturally shave down some sharp edges. Essentially, Sniper Elite is always trying to preach the tenet of fire and move, and when you're located by enemies and you abandon your position, there's a little white outline left behind in the very last place you were seen. This is extremely useful because you can not only hide and evade more efficiently, but you can booby trap an area and know with some accuracy where enemies are going to be treading, making the mine and tripwire infinitely easier to use. But I must admit, I've been saving the best new feature for last. This dope as hell, mind-blowing, ode to Mortal Kombat in 1992 levels of gratuitous video game violence, lovingly spelled out in skull shards and brain matter. In Sniper Elite 1, you would get this amazing shot where the camera would follow your bullet to its destination. But in V2, we get to see even more. Wrapping up the slow-motion cross-map journey of your shot with an x-ray view of your victim, we get to see the studio apartment-sized cavity created inside their body, complete with dishwasher and half bath. It's flashy and dumb and ultraviolet, but damn if it doesn't feel good. It's a feature that's instantly recognizable and satisfying as all hell, especially since you can snipe grenades right on people's belts. The DLC includes two main parts, weapons/skins and extra missions. I'll start with the pre-order bait since I don't care much about them. The first half of the package is new weapons and character skins. Personally, I didn't feel the need to move around and change my rifle loadout too much. I think if some of the other game modes besides just campaign were active, I would have had different setups for different games, but as it goes, I think campaign gives you the right rifle for the job on every mission. For character skins, it's neat, but also feels like something more useful for co-op or multiplayer. I actually found that the game isn't scripted to use them in some cases, as when the bigger cutscenes wrap up, like right here, it'll cut back to a shot of Carl, when in actuality you had on a different skin. Where the DLC is really worth having in the game is for the extra missions. They aren't so much like the campaign missions where there's a lot of ground to cover. They're usually set on large maps with multiple objectives. It's actually disappointing that they wouldn't have initially been available for people who played V2 back in the day, because they are fantastic displays of Sniper Elite's sandbox. There are 4 DLC missions, and I'll give you a brief rundown of each in order from best to worst. LANDWEHR CANAL is my favorite of all the DLC missions. We start out by sneaking through the remnants of this blown out building, killing guards as we go, and then we get just this vast sweeping area to survey. I don't put too much stock in the if you can see something in the distance you can go there sort of open world design, but when it's a game like Sniper Elite and you have to account for all that space and all the enemies in it that might hear you, it's some of the best in the series. NEUDORF Outpost is the one I mentioned was a remake of Harlshorst Reprise, and I'm embarrassed just how long it took me to figure it out. The game plan on this one is pretty much just sneak in, plant the explosives, and get out. Nothing too difficult, but this one takes the concept of shooting fish in a barrel and puts it on fantastic display. I think if you wanted to see the divergence in just how different players tackle different objectives, this is the map to stick them on. With a name like Assassinate the Führer, you don't get bonus points for successfully guessing what this one's about. That's right, in what would become a series staple, we get to kill Hitler. This is one of the smaller maps. You sneak through this train station before posting up on a hill and taking aim. This one is close to just a pure shooting gallery, as you're knocking them down as soon as Rebellion can set them up. This goes third just for the lack of variety.
How it feels to chew 5 gum.
St. Pierre honestly feels like the weakest of the bunch. It's a large map, but it's just so empty. You have to take out a particular Nazi general and recover documents from his body. The game has you holed up in a church to take the shot, and me being me, I booby-trapped everything. I set this bitch up to blow. I put mines everywhere and just generally burrowed myself in for a fight. And like no one charged my position. I had landmines on every entrance, not a single one blew up. 0 out of 10, no stars, get in the paddy wagon. I don't have too much to say about kill tally. I think it'd be a lot of fun if you had people to play with. It's like a horde mode style challenge with waves of enemies attacking a central base. Seeing this mode, it's not hard to see where the impetus for the Nazi Zombie Army series was. That or this system was already made and they just tacked it on. I'd love to cover multiplayer, but the scene online ain't exactly poppin'. I could do a custom lobby, but the group of friends I have is small, and I don't want to shrink it even more by insisting people pick up the V2 Remastered for a single video section.
Hitler's war machine, once unstoppable, was now on the retreat.
Because V2 is meant to serve more as a slight reboot of the series, the overall story is very close to what Sniper Elite 1 was. Much of the initial vibe can be felt in the opening cutscene. V2 keeps to the retro newsreel motif, but elucidates more of the context for us actually being in Berlin. We're treated to an introduction of Operation Overcast, the predecessor to Operation Paperclip, the plan by the American Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, which I get into a little bit in my Sniper Elite 1 video, which is linked right here. Maybe you go check that one out, Slugger. Don't worry, we'll wait for you. To briefly summarize, as the Second World War came to a close, the major powers involved recognized the powerhouse that was the German scientific community. Seeing conflict on the horizon, it was decided that, rather than risk these scientists falling into frenemy hands, namely the US and Soviet Union, they would covertly smuggle these scientists out of Germany. That's where we find Karl Fairburn at the beginning of V2, assassinating a German defector before he can meet with a Soviet agent. This serves as the game's main tutorial, but also puts Karl on the trail of 3 key scientists he needs to assassinate or recruit, located at the Germans' V2 rocket production facility. You can see how the general story trajectory and themes are emulated in V2 when compared to the first Sniper Elite. It's told in greater detail and is definitely trying to emulate a more cinematic approach, but I wouldn't say the greater quality of all these factors makes up for the general lack of depth. It's a fairly shallow, single-use story that does exactly what it needs to do. It ferries us from one level to the next and gives us people to kill. Alright, just as with the first video, I'm going to give you a brief history lesson about some real-life lore that I think enriches the story a little bit. I will warn you that this is spoiling some of the ending of Sniper Elite V2, so proceed at your own discretion. Skip to the timecode on screen now if you don't want to hear about some harsh realities of World War II, although I encourage you to stick around because the history is important. Alright, now that the squares are gone, I'm going to tell you all about nerve agents. In the penultimate mission of Sniper Elite V2, Soviet Boogaloo, we're tasked with blowing up a V2 rocket that's aimed at London and filled with Tabin. You might not recognize that name, but it's part of the G series of nerve agents, a family tree that also contains sarin and cyclosarin. This chemical weapon was allegedly named Tabin after the German word for taboo, but I had a hard time actually finding sources to back this up. It was discovered after a scientist named Gerhard Schrader's employer, IG Farben, was tasked with creating a new pesticide by the German government. IG Farben is notable for being the supplier, via pest control subsidiary of Zyklon B, the poison used in the Third Reich's notorious gas chambers. The fact that they chose to buy from a pest control company is a sickening glimpse into the deplorable reality of Nazi Germany's final solution. But getting back to Gerhard Schrader, he unfortunately failed at tackling world hunger and inadvertently became the father of nerve agents instead. You see, the compounds used in Schrader's cocktail affect a neurotransmitter that's shared by both insects and mammals. This neurotransmitter facilitates communication between nerve cells, and so by messing with it, you reduce the nerve's ability to function, which has disastrous consequences for the victim, mammalian or otherwise. From the Chemical and Engineering News website, dilute solutions destroyed insect food pests and also caused vomiting, shortness of breath, pupil dilation, drooling, sweating, diarrhea, and death in apes and other mammals. Now, despite Tabin's ferociousness as a killing machine, it was quickly discovered that sarin was far more effective, and Tabin was stored away in stockpiles, with most of the deaths coming from accidents related to improper transportation and storage. It's something of a mystery why Hitler never used such a deadly nerve agent. Some maintain it's because he was gassed during World War II and knew knew how horrible it was, but Hitler had no problem using gas to exterminate a large amount of the millions of victims of the Holocaust. I think a far likelier reality is that Germany couldn't be sure the Allies also had similar chemical weapons, so it didn't want to take the chance they might be attacked with something far deadlier. Whatever the reality, I hope this glimpse into just how high the stakes of Sniper Elite V2 are and help to shed greater light on this moment in time. Although the story premise is just a retread of the original, I have to say that I think it was done much better here. It's not just that we have more convincing characters or anything, but the threads linking all these missions together are always being pulled in one way or another. The first game felt more like a series of stories that are tangentially related, only a few of them continued from mission to mission, propelled by events we got to see, whereas in Sniper Elite V2, the events of the first mission act more as a domino for the story. Every mission is occurring because of something we saw, heard, or shot in the one before it. Because our missions are linked together, our actions and the scope of our overall goal is far more impactful. It really feels like we are the only people who can do this. When I'm sent to kill someone or find some documents, I understand why and where I fit in the chain of events necessary to halt the Germans and Soviets. I think they call this feeling synergy. Also, having Carl be the one narrating the introduction to each level was a great idea. Whether it was Rebellion's intention or not, this allows us to step into the shoes of a named character who isn't just a silent protagonist. Once again, I have to commend the work of Tom Clark-Hill. He just is and will always be Carl Fairburn to me.
With the Reds and the Krauts knocking 7 shades of shit out of each other back at Museum Island, I'd bought myself some time. I headed for Opernplatz, where Schweiger was being held. I'd been sent to kill him, but now I was trying to save his ass. Funny how some days turn out.
The last point I want to bring up is that I like that the individual soldiers aren't being villainized, even if these are the people we're killing 99% of the time. I think the only overtly evil folks are the high-ranking officers we're tasked with killing, although I might have just missed it, we never actually see an unnamed soldier committing deliberately inhuman acts, even if the acts of war sometimes make that line very, very thin. But my point is, we hear average soldiers more often than not talking about home, about their families, about how they know they're not heroes. I know it's far easier to paint our enemies with a single brush, but the world isn't black and white. The soldiers defending Berlin at this time more often than not would have been women and children, and when you look at some of the things the Allies did, they can just as convincingly play the role of boogeyman in a German civilian's nightmare. But if you're a neo-Nazi, you can lick my Overall, I think Sniper Elite V2 is a great example of what a series reboot should be. The core identity stays the same, but what makes it great is expanded upon. Even when I played the first entry, I repeated over and over that I liked what was at the root of the gameplay, but there were some serious issues that stopped it from shining. V2 smooths out those edges and reins in the scope to something more manageable. If you want to experience a more self-contained story, I think you could do a lot worse than Sniper Elite V2, and although the gameplay elements I love are more or less sprinkled in with the later entries of the series, what's here to love is clear and instantly recognizable. And that's that. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe in that order, or I'll find you, and if you want some more Analog Nightmare in your life, make sure to hit up this playlist for more. This has been an escape from my Analog Nightmare. Good luck in yours.